Folks, today we're going to stir the pot a little bit. We're going to talk about a subject that brings about strong reactions in people, both for and against. Today, I'm going to explain all about farm subsidies, how they work, the problems with them, and more importantly, how the American taxpayer actually receives a benefit from them. Now today, my goal of this video is not to convince you to be either for farm subsidies or against farm subsidies. My goal today is to explain them to you so that you can then make an educated decision for yourself on what your actual opinion of them is. Now over the years, I've heard all the terms used to describe farm subsidies: farmer welfare, farmer queens, welfare queens, etc. Just to be upfront, our farm does receive farm subsidies. We do participate in the farm programs, and this information is public information and available on the internet if you look in the right place. Now personally, I am against government subsidies, as I believe that the government should not involve itself in the free market. However, if I were not to participate, I would put our farm at a severe disadvantage in being competitive for farmland and growing our operation. I do believe that our farm operation will be able to survive if farm subsidies would be eliminated due to our unique sustainable practices. Now today, with partisan politics keeping a new farm bill from being passed, I thought this would be a good time to explain how they worked. Currently, we are working under a farm bill that was passed in 2018 called the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. It was originally a 5-year program that was set to expire in 2023, but because of the partisan politics not being able to agree on a new farm bill, it has been extended for one more year for 2024. Now, with this being an election season and partisan gridlock rampant, I don't see a new farm bill being passed this year either. More than likely, I would assume that there's going to be another extension of the 2018 farm bill. Now, you might be interested to know that a majority of the money appropriated in the farm bill does not actually go to farmers or farms. In 2018, the 5-year farm bill was projected to cost $428 billion, and 76% of that was predicted to go to nutrition programs such as SNAP. Only about 24% of the allocated money would actually go to farm programs such as crop insurance, conservation, disasters, etc. Now you might be asking yourself, why is the majority of money allocated for a farm program not actually going to farm programs? Well, it's because there's a lot more political influence from urban areas than rural areas, and if a farm bill covered only farm programs, then a farm bill would actually never be passed. Now, the farm bill passed in 2018 just basically tweaked some things from the 2014 farm bill, which was called the Agricultural Act of 2014. Now, the 2014 Farm Bill actually had massive changes that completely changed the landscape of farm subsidies. The 2014 Farm Bill did away with the traditional program payments and introduced two major programs that farmers could choose from. These programs are called Agricultural Risk Coverage, or ARC, and Price Loss Coverage, or PLC. Now, when ARC and PLC were introduced in 2014, farmers had to choose one program to participate in at the beginning, and they were locked into that program for the length of the farm bill. The 2018 Farm Bill actually allowed farmers to annually elect which program they participated in. Now, to understand how both these programs work, you need to understand a term called base acres. Both of these programs use base acres to determine if there will be a payment to the farmer or landowner. What a lot of people probably don't know is that farm program payments are not actually tied to actual production in a given year. Farm subsidies tied to farmers' actual production are not allowed by the World Trade Organization, of which the United States is a member. Now, this farm behind me, I've got cotton planted. But on this farm, for this year, I might have a chance to get paid a farm subsidy for, say, corn or wheat or soybeans. Now, this is because of base acres. Base acres actually began with the 1985 Farm Bill called the Food Security Act of 1985. The 1985 Farm Bill utilized the average acre planted on a particular farm from 1981 through 1985 to establish what the base acres for each farm was. Now, base acres are tied to each particular farm and represent the number of acres of a covered commodity eligible to receive program payments. Now, for example, the farm behind me has 57 acres of cotton currently planted on it. But back in 1985, this particular farm might have only had, say, 40 planted acres instead of 57 planted acres. You know, there might have been some fence lines. You know, there might have been some trees that have been cleared since then. So now the farm acreage is currently greater than what it was when these base acres were set back in 1985. So back in 1985, it was determined that this farm had 40 base acres on it that could be attached to a particular covered commodity. These base acres were fixed until the 2014 Farm Bill, when farmers were allowed a one-time reallocation of base acres and the commodity that they were associated with. That means that we could reallocate these base acres to more accurately reflect what we were planting at that time. Now, in this area in 1985, cotton was planted on the vast majority of acres, and most farms in this area had cotton base acres. By 2014, cotton acres had drastically reduced in this area, and a lot more corn, soybeans, and wheat was being grown. So in 2014, when we were allowed to reallocate these acres, I could have allocated all of the 40 base acres to corn, soybeans, or wheat. In the 2014 Farm Bill, cotton was no longer a covered commodity due to issues with the World Trade Organization. Now, what I actually did on most of my farms, this one being included, was break up the total number of base acres up and assign some of them to corn, some of them to soybeans, and some of them to wheat. Now, in the 2018 Farm Bill, cottonseed, not cotton, was brought back as a covered commodity, and now on a lot of my farms, I have some base acres allocated as cottonseed acres. Now, it is important to remember that the number of base acres on a farm has never grown since 1985 and may not accurately reflect the number of acres that are actually being grown on that farm. So now that you understand base acres, let's get back to ARC and PLC and how do they actually work. Let's start out with ARC and how a payment can actually be triggered. Now, ARC really works similarly to the federal crop insurance program. For ARC, each county has a list of approved program crops. For each of the crops, there is a benchmark average yield per acre for that county. It is a 5-year Olympic average for the 5 years preceding the program year. The Olympic average means for the previous 5 years, you take out the highest average and the lowest average, and you average the middle 3 crop years together to give you the Olympic average. There's also the benchmark average price. It is the Olympic average marketing year price for the preceding 5 crop years. It is not county or state specific. Next, benchmark revenue per acre is calculated. It is the county average yield multiplied by the average price. After that, guaranteed revenue per acre is calculated. The guaranteed revenue per acre is 86% of the benchmark revenue. A payment is triggered if the actual county revenue per acre for the crop year falls below the guaranteed revenue per acre. However, the maximum payment per acre is only 10% of the guaranteed revenue. Remember that these are based on county averages, not actual production numbers in my field. I could have a disaster in the field behind me and the payment wouldn't be triggered unless the actual county revenue drops. Now, there are 2 ways to trigger a payment under ARC. If the county average yield drops, or if the price for a current marketing year drops. There could be an above average county yield for the year, but if the marketing year price drops significantly from the benchmark price, per acre revenue could fall below the guaranteed revenue, thus triggering a payment. On the opposite side, the county average yield could drop below the benchmark yield, causing per acre revenue to fall below guaranteed revenue. Conversely, the county average yield could be significantly lower than the benchmark yield and a payment would still not be triggered. This could happen if the marketing year average is significantly higher than the benchmark price, causing per acre revenue to remain above the guaranteed revenue. Let's look at a few hypothetical scenarios. On the left-hand side, for the benchmark for Crockett County, Tennessee, for corn, you can see that there is an average yield of 180 bushels an acre, with a benchmark price of $4.85 per bushel. This gives us benchmark revenue of $873.19. Then 86% of the revenue is our guaranteed revenue, which equals $758.94. Now, in scenario 1, let's say that Crockett County, Tennessee has below average yields and a below average price. 165 bushel for a county average yield for corn at $4 per bushel will give us an actual revenue of $660 per acre, which is almost $91 per acre less than what our guaranteed revenue is. However, there is only a maximum allowed payment rate of $87.32 per acre, which is what we would be paid for the corn base acres on this farm. Now in scenario 2, we have a high yield and a low price. However, the higher yield more than offsets the lower price, causing our actual revenue to come in at $9 per acre higher than our guaranteed revenue, resulting in no payment being triggered. In scenario 3, we have drastically lower yield, but we have a high price, causing our actual revenue to be $10 an acre higher than our guaranteed revenue, thus resulting in no payment being triggered again. Now, how would that apply to the farm behind me? Let's say that Crockett County faces scenario 1 where we have low yields and a low price. On this 57-acre farm, we have 40 base acres as I referenced earlier. Let's say those 40 base acres are evenly divided between the 4 crops I grow. I've got 10 base acres for corn, 10 base acres for soybeans, 10 for wheat, and 10 for cottonseed. If a payment is actually triggered, only 85% of the base acres of that commodity are paid for. So if corn triggers a payment, I will actually receive a payment for 8.5 out of the 10 base acres. 8.5 acres times the payment rate of $87.32 in scenario 1 totals $742.22. That would be the payment for this farm. If any of the other commodities with base acres on this farm trigger a payment, I would also receive a payment for those based on the individual scenarios for those commodities. Now that we've covered ARC, let's see how PLC works. It is a lot simpler than ARC in that it only focuses on commodity prices with county yields not actually figured in. In the 2018 Farm Bill, producers were allowed to update their historical yields in regards to PLC. These yields were based on the average yield of a commodity for the 2013 through 2017 crop years on the particular farm. These yields will be used to figure a payment amount if a payment is actually triggered under PLC. For PLC, there's a reference price on every cover commodity. Now, this reference price can fluctuate yearly based upon the Olympic average price for the preceding 5 years. If the marketing year average falls below the established reference price, a payment is triggered. Let's look at some scenarios behind me if I elected to take PLC on this farm. Let's say my average yield for corn from 2013 through 2017 on this farm was 160 bushels per acre. The established reference price for the 2024 crop year for corn in the United States is $4.01 per bushel. If the marketing year average price for corn is $4.10 per bushel, then no payment would be triggered because the marketing year average price was above the reference price. Now, if the marketing year average comes in at say $3.95 per bushel, we would receive 6 cents per bushel on our established 160 bushel per acre yield, giving us a payment of $9.60 per acre. Now, if the marketing year average price drops even further, as referenced in scenario 3, our payment would grow further. Now, instead of using 160 bushels per acre average yield, let's just say that our average yield for this farm was 200 bushels per acre. At the same marketing year average price, as referenced in scenario 3, our payment would be larger. Now, do you remember the maximum allowed payment per acre that we discussed in ARC? Now, to my knowledge, there is no maximum acre payment in PLC. I may be wrong on this. I cannot find research saying whether there was or was not. However, in PLC, we are still limited to being paid on only 85% of our base acres for that commodity. For example, under scenario 2, we are being paid $9.60 per base acre. On this farm, we have 10 base corn acres. We will be paid for 8.5 of those acres, giving us a total payment of $81.60 total for the entire farm. Now, as I said earlier, each year we can make elections on which program we want to go with. We can decide crop by crop. For example, on this farm, we have 10 base acres each of corn, cottonseed, soybeans, and wheat. We can elect to go with ARC on corn and soybeans and then go with PLC on cottonseed and wheat, or any other different combination that we want to. Now we have to decide which program to go with by March 15th of that crop year. So as you can imagine, producers are doing a whole lot of guessing about how the year will play out as far as, potential yields, what the market's going to do up or down, and as far as trying to determine which program would benefit us the most. Now, one other thing you might want to know is that if there are any payments triggered in a crop year, those payments won't be made until the next crop year. For example, if I draw a payment on this farm for this year, that payment won't be received until after October 1st, 2025. Now, those are the two basic pillars of farm subsidies, but there are quite a few other parts of the Farm Bill that can subsidize producers in other ways. One of those is the federal crop insurance program. Now, I made a video a couple years ago detailing how the crop insurance program works, so I won't dive off into it too much right here. You can find that video on our How Farm Stuff Works playlist. But to give you a brief overview, producers can elect to insure their crop at different levels, and a portion of their per acre premium is subsidized by the federal government. The percentage of the premium subsidized depends on the coverage level. The higher coverage levels are subsidized much less than the lower coverage levels. Now, these subsidies are not paid directly to the producer, they are paid to the insurance company. Crop insurance is not run by the federal government, but is regulated by the federal government through private companies. Crop insurance premiums are set by the federal government and will not vary from one crop insurance agency to another. Now, conservation is another big part of the farm program that producers can elect to participate in. One of the most prominent conservation programs is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, which is administered by the Natural Resource and Conservation Services, or the NRCS. This program subsidizes producers to make improvements on their farm that will improve the environment. Now, for many years, this program focused on reducing soil erosion that would lower the productivity of farmland and pollute the nation's waterways. This was done by having a cost share plan with the producer to build terraces, sediment control basins, grass waterways, buffer strips, rock chutes, and many other structures. The NRCS would draw up the plans for a structure according to federal guidelines and determine what the cost should be. The producer would then be required to build the structure according to the specifications, and EQIP would reimburse the producer for a portion of the estimated cost. Now, more recently, EQIP is being used for other conservation practices such as the use of cover crops, pollinator habitats, nutrient management planning, transitioning to organic, and many others. EQIP will reimburse the producer for the portion of the cost typically associated with these practices. However, there's a limited amount of money allocated each year for EQIP projects, and not all of the projects will be funded. Producers must submit an application that will be ranked by the NRCS, and payments will be made to the highest ranked projects and work their way down the list until allocated funds are exhausted. Now, years ago, our farm did participate in EQIP and related programs to build these erosion control structures. Now that all of our farms have these permanent structures built on them, we are now utilizing EQIP and other programs to help us with the cost of planting cover crops. Now, some years we have been able to get funded and other years we have not, just depending on how our application has ranked against the other applications for the country, and also the total amount of money that has been allocated for our county for EQIP purposes. Another popular conservation program is the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP. This is probably the most likely program that you've heard of. This is a long-standing program that has been around since 1985, and where a landowner elects to take his land out of crop or animal production and sows it with a specific blend of native plants. The purpose of this program is to take low-yielding, highly erodible ground out of production so that the soil can heal itself, protect water quality, and provide habitat for wildlife. Now, there are strict guidelines that a landowner must follow in the maintenance of the land, and there are severe limitations on the use of the land. If the landowner follows these guidelines, the CRP program will pay the landowner a specified rental rate per acre every year. Notice that I said landowner, not producer. The actual owner of the property will receive the payment. Producers can receive the payment if they are the actual landowner of that property. The CRP contracts for a parcel of land are generally 10 to 15 years in length. Now, we don't participate in the CRP program as all of our tillable land is put into crops. Another popular conservation program that we participate in is the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. This program is similar to EQIP, but it focuses more on helping you expand your conservation efforts by paying a portion of the cost to implement new conservation activities. Now, there can also be other farm subsidy payments. If a particular region is declared a disaster area by the federal government due to extreme drought, flooding, hurricanes, etc., the legislative branch may pass bills to assist producers in those areas. However, to be eligible for any kind of disaster payments passed in subsequent bills, a producer must have purchased at least some level of crop insurance to help mitigate his loss. Now, there can be other subsidies available, say in the form of low-interest loans. These are generally available to beginning farmers and ranchers, minority farmers, women farmers, or Native American farmers. There also may be low-interest loans available to other producers if their area has been declared a disaster area. Now, imagine that right about now, you're probably thinking, it sure sounds like farmers can make a killing off of subsidies if they farm enough acres. Yeah, it seems like we're talking about some potentially big numbers here, especially people who only have to balance the books on their household and not a business. It can be a lot of money, but subsidies paid for low yield, low price, or disaster do not even come close to covering the losses actually experienced. And we also have payment limitations to talk about also. Now, under these payment limitations, any producer who has over a $900,000 adjusted gross income for any of the previous 3 years is not eligible to participate in PLC or ARC. Now, if a producer does qualify for PLC and ARC, if payments for PLC or ARC are triggered, total payments for the producer cannot exceed $125,000 per crop year. Now, if a producer elects to participate in CSP, contracts have a total payment limitation of $200,000 for the length of the Farm Bill. Now, if you're looking at the situation we're in now, the original 2018 Farm Bill was for 5 years. Well, now it's been extended to 6 years for 2024, probably will be extended to 7 years for 2025. So that payment limitation of $200,000 still applies even though the Farm Bill is being extended. EQIP programs have a total payment limit for the length of the Farm Bill at $450,000. And there can also be other limitations just depending on the program. Now that we discussed the basic tenets of farm subsidy, let's talk about the problems with farm subsidies. In my opinion, the single biggest problem with farm subsidies is that they're not actually tied to the actual production on a farm in a given year. Like I mentioned earlier, this is because the United States is a member of the World Trade Organization, and the WTO has laws specifically forbidding subsidizing actual farm production. The WTO believes that subsidizing actual production would be trade distorting, and the WTO was created in 1995 to increase access for imports and reduce barriers to trade for the membership countries. However, this means that because subsidies are not actually tied to production, I might receive assistance in years that I don't need it and not receive assistance in years that I actually do need it. I've already demonstrated how I might be paid for a crop on a farm that I'm not even growing that year. Or my farms on this end of the county might be devastated by a flash drought or flooding, but because the whole county was not affected, I might not receive payment when I need it most. Now, there has been one farm subsidy that I'm aware of in history that was actually tied to actual crop production on a farm in a given year. In 2018, President Trump thumbed his nose at the WTO and pushed for the Market Facilitation Program. The Market Facilitation Program was completely separate of the 2018 Farm Bill. This was in response to the trade war with China, in where China was retaliating against the U.S. tariffs by importing much less agricultural commodities than what they had been previously. Now, for a period of years, this resulted in much lower commodity prices for the U.S. farmer due to decreased demand, with the U.S. farmer bearing the brunt of the trade war. The Market Facilitation Program provided supplemental payments based upon actual farm production to help cover the additional losses experienced by producers. Now on to other problems. Sometimes the payments levels for conservation efforts exceed the cost of implementing the practice for the producer. Just here, for instance, In recent years here in Tennessee, equip payments for planting cover crops have far exceeded the cost of farmers actually planting them. Now, this has led to some producers abusing the system by planting low-cost cover crops just to make a profit off of the federal subsidy without any regards to making sure if the cover crops actually succeed and benefit the land the way the program is designed to. Now, these new users signing up for cover crop subsidies usually rank quite a bit higher on the list that I talked about earlier, thus drawing money away from lower ranked producers who have been doing it for a while, who are actually trying to make the system work. And then not only that, overpaying per acre for cover crops means that fewer producers and fewer acres are covered by the limited amount of allocated money. Another problem with the existing farm subsidies is that the U.S. is a big nation with climate ranging from tropical to desert. The 2018 Farm Bill is kind of a one-size-fits-all program, but with an area the size of the U.S. with its vastly different growing regions, it's impossible to have one farm bill that suits every producer the way that they need it to. Some areas may receive more funding than they need while others suffer. And then of course there's the elephant in the room, the cost. The 2018 Farm Bill was projected to cost $428 billion over its 5-year lifespan. Now, even factoring that 75% of that $428 billion was projected to go to programs not related to agriculture, like WIC and SNAP. But even with that being said, we're still talking about a huge chunk of change for a country that is currently sitting at $35 trillion in debt as I film this right now. Farm subsidies do take money paid by the taxpayers and distribute it to others just like any other kind of subsidy does. It's just the nature of subsidies. But that being said, how are farm subsidies different from other types of subsidies? How do they actually benefit the American taxpayer? In my opinion, the American taxpayer does actually receive a return on its investment. Now let's look at the cost of food. Depending on the source you look at, the percentage of disposable income spent for food by the average American is between 5 to 10%. Since the pandemic, I'm sure you've noticed that prices in grocery stores have gone up dramatically. According to the statistics I found, in 2023, U.S. consumers paid around 11.2% of their disposable income on food, but wages were generally higher also. Now this table that I'm showing right now shows the percentage of disposable income paid by the citizens of various countries across the world. As you can see, the Americans spend the lowest percentage of their disposable income on food, lower than any other nation in the world. This is mainly attributed to two reasons. Well, the first reason is that America is a large company capable of growing almost every type of food that we consume. We don't need to import very much food, thus lowering cost. The U.S. is actually a net exporter of food. Now, because a lot of these other countries' size and topography and climate and everything, many of these other countries have to import a large percentage of their food because they're just not able to grow it themselves. But the second reason for low food costs in the U.S. is farm subsidies. Farm subsidies keep food prices low. But how do farm subsidies keep prices low? Did you know that farmers make up less than 1% of the U.S. population? As of the last census, there are 2.6 million U.S. farmers that produce enough food to feed 333 million people, plus a lot more across the world. The bottom line is that subsidies help keep farmers in business. Both the good farmers that could survive without subsidies and the bad ones that would likely fail without subsidies. Currently, there is about 893 million acres of farmland in the U.S. producing crops and livestock. That figures to about 343 acres per farmer. The 2.6 million farmers are having to compete against each other for the available farmland to make a profit for their business. The most common way to increase a farm business's profit is to increase yield. Increased yield leads to increased national production. Increased production leads to increased supply. As you can see from the charts, production per acre has increased dramatically over the course of many years. Now, what happens when you have increased supply? Increased supply leads to lower prices. As you can see from these price charts, commodity prices that we receive have remained relatively flat from 1983 until now. Corn and wheat prices have remained very flat, while soybeans have seen a modest uptick. Cattle prices have grown some over the years, with the latest increase most likely due to the pandemic. Now, on some of these commodities, you can see spikes where prices have really jumped before falling back flat. These spikes were generally the result of production issues resulting in a shortfall in production, leading to subsequent years having an elevated price. These price spikes would likely become permanent without subsidies. If there's fewer farmers, there's less competition for the land. If there's less competition for the land, farmers can farm more acres and spread their fixed cost over more acres, leading to less urgency to drive a profit from maximizing production on every single acre. So folks, that concludes a very basic overview of major farm subsidy programs and how they work. Now, this video dealt with primarily the row crop side because, well, that's what I'm familiar with. I'm sure that there's some kind of subsidies out there for livestock and animal producers, vegetable producers. I'm just not very well versed on how those programs work. I'm sure there's something out there. I just don't know what the exact details are. Now, when dealing with these farm programs on an individual farm level, it can be a whole lot more complex than what I've described here. I just tried to give you the 30,000 foot view of how farm subsidies work. But now that you have the facts about how these programs work, you can now make an educated decision about what your position is on farm subsidies. Are you for them or against them based upon what you know now? Now, while I understand a lot of y'all may have a lot of anger about your hard-earned tax dollars being given to someone else, I hope that now that you can recognize that you are actually getting some kind of value for it. Well guys, I hope y'all enjoyed the video. I hope you found interesting, and I appreciate y'all watching, and we'll see you in the next one.